Yes, hi. It's been a while since the my last recording, and I'm a bit inspired these days to do it more regularly. I'm currently in Beijing. Just did a 6-day workshop in Guangzhou, and before that, Mexico, my traveling life. So I thought today I'd talk a bit about a kind of professional issue in my view. Different Gestalt people, I guess, will have different views of this, but it's about touch and psychotherapy. So Gestalt is very much a somatically based therapy in so many ways because we're interested in the body, we're interested in feelings, we're interested in embodied experience very much, and different Gestalt people work with that in many different ways. But a common focus in Gestalt is what's your experience, and particularly what's your somatic experience, your feelings, the sensations in your body. The reason we use that is it helps ground people in who they are as compared to who they think they are, and draws people out of their idea of the past or the future into current experience, brings it live to air, and gives us lots of really useful information, and also it's very much a key part of the way we work with awareness in Gestalt. So awareness in the present, focusing awareness, and it helps us move through what I call the wave of awareness, which is just the natural evolution of awareness from an initial kind of sensation through to energy, through to mobilization and action and meeting our needs, which is very natural to us as human beings, both on a kind of physiological level, hunger, etc., as well as on an emotional level. That's one of the key kind of understandings of Gestalt and how awareness works. So that's an important part of the nature of Gestalt and how we complete unfinished business, etc. So this awareness starts in terms of that wave of awareness with sensation, and often the way that people interrupt the flow of awareness is through various cognitive mechanisms or conditioning beliefs, etc. So that's the prologue. Now, working with the body, working with feelings, great. However, particularly in contemporary psychotherapy, in many places, there's a sort of all the way to a kind of like no-touch rule. You never touch a client for any purposes, perhaps other than shaking their hand at the beginning or end of a session. So that's one end, and the other end is, I guess, people who do explicitly somatic psychotherapy, so they work with bodies and they hands-on in various ways to support body awareness and movement and things like that. So Gestalt is not, I would call it somatic psychotherapy. So it's in that field, but many Gestaltists, like I say, they might focus more on the relational dynamics or something, or they might focus more on experiment and exploring awareness through action and trying things out. So there's lots of different ways in Gestalt that people can do that. So there are Gestaltists, such as myself, who use touch quite a lot, and it's controversial, I guess, especially in this day and age where often therapists think that touch is too dangerous, and there's all sorts of objections from the slippery slope of sexual engagement, and then kind of arguments about transference and things like that. Now, I'll just say something about transference because I got a little bee in my bonnet about it in a way, because transference, it comes originally from psychoanalysis, a key part of how the whole thing's supposed to work. The therapist is kind of separate and a little bit unknown, or very much unknown by the client, and the purpose of that is so that the client can transfer their attachments or projections onto the therapist, and then it's evident that this is all about the client. It's a very brief summary of the idea of transference. So that's a key part of how things are supposed to work in classical psychoanalysis. Now, part of the irony is that word has come through into the 21st century, is used by lots of people, including cognitive behavioral therapists. But cognitive behavioral therapy is nothing like classical psychoanalysis, and it doesn't use transference, but this is a term which has come through. Now, there's a variety of critics of this term who see it as kind of old, outdated, unnecessary, confusing in various ways, and doesn't really reflect some of our more sophisticated understandings of relationship and such. So transference, as I like to say to my students, doesn't exist. It's a word, it's an idea, it's a concept. Might be useful and does refer to phenomena. It's kind of may be a useful model in a variety of ways, but it's not a thing. So, the concern about touch, that it somehow intensifies transference or confuses the client, I don't myself think that that's a valid argument, really. I don't, and in my clinical experience, I don't find it interferes the client. People are worried, oh, well, the client's going to become attached to you, or I don't know, all sorts of fears that students voice to me that they've heard in their training as psychotherapists or that they've read, which I understand those fears. And of course, there are important cautions in the use of touch. However, I haven't found that there's some terrible transferential thing that happens that ruins the therapy in using touch, in my experience. So I just don't buy that there's substance in whatever that argument is, which includes this notion of the client might become too attached or dependent. But then the issue is not touch per se, it's attachment or dependency, and how we handle that in psychotherapy, which is a general issue in therapy. And again, I'm not afraid of dependency, because as long as I'm not using it for my own needs, the client becoming dependent, it might be a stage in the therapy. And I mean, I've had some clients who at some points saw me daily, and this particular client I'm thinking was highly depressed, had done all sorts of therapy to try to deal with depression, was very stuck in a depressed place. And I was a bit concerned at one point, daily therapy for months and months, it seems a bit much, like, am I just taking her money or something? But, my supervisor was reassuring. And sure enough, after about four months of that, I don't know, she's better. So I'm not that worried about dependency. I think if we're professionally managing and, as I say, aware of our own interests. So that objection to touch, I don't really, in my experience, it's not substantive. And the big fear, of course, is that touch leads to sexual excitement, which leads to confusion or blurring of boundaries and having sex with the client. So clearly, sex with clients, not a good idea, not good for the clients, not good for the therapist, really. We can say that pretty clearly. And then that said, okay, I'm clear, I'm not going to have sex with the client, so then that's not my concern. I have good boundaries around that. So then what's left? Okay, you might not have sex, but it might be sexualized touch or awakened sexual feelings in the client. Okay, fair enough. So I guess in terms of awakened sexual feelings in the client, that's something I'm very careful about and aware of, whether I'm using touch or not, and I'm interested in. As far as I'm concerned, sexual feelings are like other feelings. They're just feelings and something to be interested in and talked about in psychotherapy and useful. And if they come up with the client, then I'm more than happy to discuss them and use that experience as part of the therapeutic mode and look at the context of that, sexuality, etc. So as far as I'm concerned, that can be valuable if it comes into awareness for the client. My concern about stimulating sort of sexual feelings in the client, I think it's mostly about my intention. I say mostly because some clients who, I've had a few clients who are very much, let's say, in their sexual energy or wanting to bring that into the therapeutic relationship, then I'm going to be much more careful with touch with them. In fact, I'm less likely to use it because I'd rather work with the issue of the dynamic of sexuality, sexual energy, attraction and things. And in that case, touch can be confusing or maybe problematic. However, that is then a piece of therapeutic work. But I say mostly because I think it's mostly about my intention, my clarity. If I don't have sexual intentions, I'm not going to use sexually oriented touch. I don't want to stimulate that in clients. And that's pretty clear. And I generally find the client responds in kind. If I'm clear, I've got my boundaries clear, I know who I am, I'm aware when I've got sexual energy, then the touch doesn't evoke that. Sure, it evokes longings or all sorts of things, but like I say, I'm okay to use that as part of the therapeutic process. So, for me, all this comes into dialogue and is brought into the therapeutic relationship. So, as far as I'm concerned, all that gets processed. Now, I guess, another objection as well, what about the things you're not aware of? Well, that's an issue in therapy, the things that the client's not aware of, the things that I'm not aware of, sure, can come up and bite us. So hence the need as a therapist to do my own therapy, to be very much onto myself, be very much aware in the moment of who I am and my intentions and what my feelings are and my needs. And as far as I'm concerned, that's my work as a therapist to do that. And that's just, whether I use touch or not, that's just as true. And so with that self-awareness and using touch, I don't find that there's creepy things that come in or something. The caveat, though, is awareness, and it's essential to be able to be tuned into my own body. I need to notice what the flows are of energy in my body, and right down to fine detail and where it is and how intense it is and what the nature of that is. If I'm going to work with the client's feelings, I need to be just as much in tune with my own, not just in a general sense, but moment by moment in the therapy. As far as I'm concerned, that's very much the nature of Gestalt work. So it's especially true using touch in therapy. I need to be in touch with myself, aware of. So that's certainly an important caveat. And what else can I say? Well, there's all sorts of different touch, and as far as I'm concerned, the touch that I use is in response to what's happening with the client. For me, there's not any particular formulas. Very, very 100% clear. I could say almost on absolute level, I will always ask for permission in any kind of touch. And moving from one kind of touch to the other, I'll ask for permission. Is it okay I put my hand on your back? Or, whatever that is. So the permission, that's informed consent, so to speak. And there's objections. Well, the client's in a vulnerable place, or I'm the authority, so they might well say yes when they mean no, or not really have enough ground to set the boundary, which then of course is a therapeutic issue, and I would hope that I kind of pick that up. But sure, there's a chance that they would not be comfortable. Then for me, the onus is on me to notice that, to be interested, and that's important that I don't lead with my need, that I lead with what I understand is the appropriate response to the client in that moment, so that as soon as I sense some pulling back or reluctance or anything like that, I'm going to be able to respond immediately to it. That's my intention, and that's my practice as far as I can. And I have to say, in many years of practice, I haven't had anyone report to me discomfort with touch that I've used. Now, it's always possible that they might be uncomfortable and not report it, but and I'm pretty open to hearing from people or their objections. I create a safer climate as I can in therapy for people to be very honest with me. I'm the authority, though, so I realise always there's a possibility people won't. However, we have to proceed in therapy somehow. It's the same thing with the Gestalt experiment. I say, I suggest you put your mother on your chair and talk to her. Is that okay with you? It's the same thing. I'm asking for consent with each of the things that I propose. So, I have to go along on the basis of a certain faith that the client's able to represent themselves. And if I think the client's particularly vulnerable and they have a particular difficulty and the boundaries of something, then I'm going to be much more careful about that and extra tuned in as far as I can be to a place where they might say yes but mean no or something. And if that comes up, then that's a very interesting topic to explore in therapy. So informed consent. So that's a very important part of it. The type of touch used, well, as I say, for me, there's no formula. I'm doing my best to stay in my own world, stay in my own body, my own feelings, and also tune into, as far as I can, what's happening for the client, ask them the verbal report, look at them, and in whatever bodily resonant sense I can to be with whatever that experience is that they're reporting, or that I observe, or that has some kind of impact on me, or that I can imagine myself into. So that all helps me guide me with what is the kind of touch. Sometimes there's a soft touch, sometimes there's a firm touch, sometimes pressure. This is where I don't think there's a clear formula for how you manage touch, other than that it's always in the interest of the client. That is, for me, that's the ethical issue. The ethical issue is not touch or not touch. The ethical issue is what's in the best interest of the client. And here's where I'm a bit sort of on my platform, because I think sometimes the interest of the client is some kind of touch. And for a therapist, for any therapist, here's my polemic, for any therapist to not touch because they're afraid of being sued, or they're afraid of what might happen, or they're not supposed to, or something, for me, is not putting the interest of the client first, and in that sense is not really ethical practice. So I'm much more interested in what's going to help the client than external ideas about what's good or what's not good. And as I say, this is an ongoing conversation, and my focus in therapy, identify as a relational Gestalt therapist. So my focus, my attention, my energy, my investment is in building the relationship with the client that's as open, authentic, and two-way and supportive as possible. So on the base of that kind of relationship, then the touch can take place, and then do my best to make sure that it comes out of that relationship. And it's not like a stranger touching them, it's like someone who they're connected to. And obviously, I'm not going to touch the erogenous zones, places where there's possible sexual stimulation. And of course, different people, sometimes there's different erogenous zones, but that for me is an obvious objection, which I agree to. And other than that, I'm pro-touch, and that's also me. I like touch. I'm a touch kind of person, so it's consistent with who I am. I'm not going to say a therapist should touch, so I think sometimes clients need that in some form or another, and I don't believe in therapists withholding that from clients if that is what's appropriate. What else can I say? I was interested in I don't know what you want to call it, the cuddle party movement. In the States they call it Cuddle Sanctuary. In LA they do at least. And I first experienced that 15 years ago now or something in Mullumbimby. Someone ran a cuddle party and I went. And the idea is that it's very boundaried, very contained. There's a facilitator, there's a time boundary, there's extremely strict rules. And within those rules, people are free to touch each other in non-sexual ways. That's an important basic caveat in those cuddle party situations. So I've explored that over the years, attended a variety of these cuddle parties or cuddle sanctuary experiences, and they usually last an hour and a half, and the rules are very much about consent, that each touch is consensual. Say, would you like a hug? Or I'd like to give you a hug, is that okay? And the person says yes, or they say no, or they say, well, I don't want a hug, but I'd like to sit next to you and hold hands or something. Sounds a bit twee when you talk about it like this. Certainly some people think that it's just kind of horrific that people who are complete strangers would come together in a room and touch each other, which is fair enough. That's not for everyone, but some people, like myself and some other people, like that, enjoy that. And it's been really good, actually, because it's really taught me a few things about touch, in terms of just being okay to touch in a way that's about connection and an agreement, mutuality, and very clear boundaries around the sexuality. It's non-sexual touch, and that men and women can do that, and can do that quite successfully, and It doesn't get sexual, and in fact, for many women in these cuddle sanctuaries, it's a great experience because they get touched from a man without, expectations or something else is going to happen or it's automatically going to become sex. So personally, I think that's quite a healthy thing for people to be able to experience. So I sort of draw on that too, and some of the notions and applications of touch in psychotherapy, that I think touch is healthy. It's a fundamental human part of our humanity, and that just because we're grown up doesn't mean we still don't need touch. And sure, people get touch in friendships or close relationships or intimacy, but not necessarily. And different people have different levels of need of touch. So it's not that there are professional cuddlers who get paid to cuddle and touch. I'm not putting myself in that category. However, within the therapeutic domain, I think that it can be appropriate to use touch to support people. I mean, that's primarily my orientation towards touch, is around support, facilitation of awareness as part of the therapeutic process. And touch can be a very big support, I find. And often when people are dealing with trauma or really difficult experiences that they're processing, they need a lot of support, and touch is one of the ways to do that. So various colleagues would probably do disagree with me, though I did I had a correspondence with a colleague recently who wrote a book about Gestalt, and then he's very cautious in one of the pieces about touch, and it's a good thing, but in this day and age, probably can't really use it. And I wrote to him and I said, well, I respectfully disagree with you, because I think that it can be used appropriately. And he said, well, yes, I do use it, but I think beginning therapists are, maybe not so clear, and maybe they need to use it more cautiously, which I think is a reasonable thing to say as well. So it's not just open slather, it's very much about your own sense of competency and confidence and clarity and awareness. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Talk with you soon.